Welcome to the Bike Shed. Today we're going to be talking about how you set up your suspension when you get your new bike and you just want to hit the trail. Assuming that you've already got your tyre pressure sorted, let's have a look at your shocks. And go and get your riding gear on. Things like your shoes, your camelback, helmet, all the regular gear that you typically roll out the door with when you go for a ride. The reason is your suspension setup will be inaccurate if you don't have all this gear on, because it all adds to your total weight, and suspension setup is based on rider weight. The goal with your suspension, as simple as it sounds, is to suspend the rider above the terrain and isolate both the bike and rider from the irregularities of the trail. With this, we increase control, traction, comfort, and most of all, we increase the amount of fun you can have out on the trail. Okay, now we're going to set up your front suspension. Firstly, open up any lockout dials that may be present on your fork and set the rebound dial to the fastest or most open or free to move setting. I would also recommend that cycling the fork up and down a good 4 or 5 times to ensure that it's moving freely. We want the fork to be in its extended resting state and also have the minimum amount of seal friction for when we test it at the end of this process. The next thing we will work on is setting your air pressure. The vast majority of forks on the market will have a small table on the back of the fork leg. This will give you a great pressure range to use as a guide for your starting point. This chart's based on your rider's body weight, so you want to weigh yourself with all your riding gear on, helmet, camelback, shoes, etc. so that when you weigh yourself on the scales, you're getting an accurate representation of how much you really weigh. The next step is to grab your trusty shock pump and increase or decrease the fork pressure until you hit this mark. Most forks have suspension sag guidelines written on the fork leg, which is a great reference tool to let you know that you're in the right kind of range. Once you've set the air pressure, cycle the fork again a few times, then proceed to pull the O-ring all the way down on the fork till it sits just above the fork seal. Then carefully climb onto your bike, but make sure when you do hop on that you don't excessively bounce and compress the suspension in the process. You don't want the bike to dive deeper into its suspension travel than it should at this point. You then want to position your body weight in a very central manner over the bike. Once you're in this position, I like the client to gently backpedal. This subtle movement and gentle wriggling around on the bike is usually enough to get the suspension to compress and find its natural settling point, which we like to call the sag point. At this point, your bike has a lockout switch. I would gently reach for the lockout and close it off to prevent the suspension further compressing when you're dismounting the bike. Also, if you've got a buddy helping you at this point, you can get them to have a look at where the O-ring is positioned and either take a measurement or just take a note of where it's sitting within the guide printed on the fork's leg. If you're doing this yourself, be very sure to get off the bike gently without further compressing the suspension. Most of the time, 25 to 30% sag would be the recommended range that we would like to use as our reference point, but it's personal preference that really matters here. The next key point we're going to cover today is rebound speed. So what is rebound speed? The easiest way to explain it is when the fork takes on a big impact and compresses, it's how fast the fork is allowed to come back to its original resting position in readiness for the next impact. Why is this so important? You see, if your rebound is too slow, your fork will not be ready to absorb multiple hits in quick succession on the trail. On the flip side, if your rebound is way too fast, you'll find that you get a lot of referral back through the handlebars. Plus, your front wheel will often tend to feel like it's deflecting and bouncing off objects rather than absorbing them. The way I would best describe the perfect rebound setting would be to have the fork's rebound set so that the fork can come back quickly to its resting state without feeling like it's topping out or kicking back and referring through the handlebars. To set rebound, I will usually turn the rebound dial all the way around to the plus setting or the slower setting, typically to begin with. If you compress the fork a few times, you should feel that it's very slow and sluggish in its return, just to let you know you're in the right spot. From here, you can gently unwind the rebound dial, one click at a time, incrementally. Some rebounds literally move through 90 degrees, so you don't have the clicks. Compress the fork sharply and note the feedback you're getting through the handlebars and the grips. As a general rule, you'll want the fork to return back quickly without any notable kickback. The job of your suspension is to absorb an impact and then return the wheel back to the ground, ready for the next one, dissipating the impact in the process. Keep gently winding this rebound dial out until you find the sweet spot. If in doubt, start again until you find it. You will find a lot of fork manufacturers will also have suggested rebound settings on their website for you to use again as a guide. As a final tip, I would also recommend wiping down the seal area on your fork on a routine basis to keep it clean. This will drastically improve the life of your forks and your fork seals and help to keep your bike running in tip-top shape. After you're done adjusting the air pressure in your front suspension, you're ready to have a look at the rear. Marin's got a neat guide on their website that gives you baseline air pressures to get you started. Most modern shocks have travel indication markings on them to help you get your sag measurements set up correctly. The first step is to make sure the O-ring is pushed all the way to the base of the shock or the fork seal. The next step is to sit on your bike and make sure you put your body weight towards the middle of the bike. Sometimes we refer to this as the attack position. The goal is to establish the settling point of your suspension with all your body weight on it. Typically, I get the rider to backpedal a little bit and gently wriggle around on the bike to let the shocks find their settling point. From here, make sure the O-rings are pushed back hard up against the shock seals before you get off the bike. Now when you do this, try and get off the bike very gently so that you don't further compress the suspension, because this will change the position of these O-rings. This is where having a buddy to help you can be very, very helpful. Ideally, you want to be in the range of 25 to 30% sag. If it's sagging more than that, you'll need to add some pressure with your shock pump. Or if it's higher, decrease the pressure accordingly. After making any air pressure adjustments on a rear shock, be sure to cycle the shock several times in order to balance the pressure out in the internal chambers before getting back on and checking your sag measurement yet again. Now that you've got your air pressure set, we move on to rebound. Start by gently winding the rebound dial fully closed to the slowest setting. Often this is the plus setting on the shock. Then wind it back open gradually, one click at a time, testing as you go. The end goal in simple terms is that you can feel and see the wheel return back to its starting point, just a fraction slower than the impact speed that you hit it with. You want your suspension to absorb the impact and return the wheel to the ground as quick as possible, but without kicking back at you like a pogo stick at the same time. There are helpful settings provided on a chart in the Marin website again, which is a great place to get you started. Also, many of the suspension manufacturers like RockShox and Fox have great resources on their websites to help you delve into this further. That is when you're ready. Your suspension is now set.